It was June. The restaurant that my friend Drew worked at shut down completely. He hasn't worked since. This is the reality for millions of people around the world and millions of Americans, a reality that has caused economic and personal devastation, hardship, and frustration. It's a reality that calls for a bold policy response from our government. We should send out more stimulus checks to the American people. And there's a number of reasons for this. Stimulus checks have helped protect the most vulnerable in our society. Stimulus checks are not just a way to protect the most vulnerable, but they're good for everyone involved in the country and in the economy. And also the federal debt from spending on the stimulus checks is not as important as the well-being of the American people. Now, to better understand the urgency of the need for stimulus, we need to be clear of the devastation that the pandemic has caused. The U.S. has lost over 22 million jobs since mid-March 2020, an even more devastating impact in the Great Recession of the late 2000s, which in and of itself wreaked havoc on the country. This has had material impact for so many families. 8 million Americans have slipped into poverty, the greatest jump in over 60 years in the country, and over 40 million Americans have faced eviction from their homes since the start of the pandemic. And with an economy that is frozen still because of the need for health and safety protocols and practices and the prioritization of that, how do Americans find a way to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads? Stimulus checks have helped protect the most vulnerable in our society. The first two rounds of stimulus checks, totaling $1,800 per individual and a little bit more per family, provided essential support for those who were affected most by the pandemic. Studies have shown that an overwhelming majority of the stimulus payments were used for immediate expenses like rent and utility bills for households making over $100,000. And these are bills that if people could not pay, they would have had to find a new place to live or live without electricity or internet, the bare essentials. It's the right thing to do. People have fallen into these circumstances through no fault of their own. I mean, we didn't choose to have a worldwide pandemic that would wreak havoc on our country and our families and our friends. And we need to have a baseline of decency and dignity for our peers and our compatriots and the people who live around us. It's the right thing to do. And this is not just a handout for those who are the most vulnerable. No, instead, the stimulus payments actually help everybody in the country and help everybody in the economy. The economy is so interconnected. People need funds to participate in the economy, and they'll spend if they have more money. And those at the top of the economy need consumers and consumer activity to continue to protect their own financial interests. Small businesses need customers. Small businesses, which so many people say are the backbone of the American economy. This is not just a handout to those who are the most vulnerable. It's about everybody, the middle class, small business owners, large business owners. The stimulus check is a way to protect everyone's economic standing. Everyone has a stake in the well-being of the middle class. Now, unfortunately, the large barrier to enacting these policies are political arguments, and one that is quite prominent is the climbing federal debt. Now, this is, on the face of it, a very hard argument to make, I think. It's quite clear to me that the immediate well-being of the American people is much more important than the federal debt. And if we were to claim the priority of controlling the national debt, we would have to do that while people starved. And it also, as a financial and economic argument, doesn't quite make sense because you can't increase tax revenues in the future to pay down the national debt if people are living in poverty and don't have jobs. And this is clear in the past. I mean, between 2008 and 2009, the Great Recession, which we talked about a little bit earlier, tax revenues dipped by over $400 billion in just 1 year. And after a massive stimulus package in 2009 by the Obama administration and support from the Bush administration in 2008, federal tax revenues increased by over $1.2 trillion by 2015 alone and have continued decline since 2019. So the real question is will we prioritize political interests and a political barrier over the lives and well-beings of millions of Americans and their families? And even as a financial argument, in the long run, we'll increase tax revenues in the future anyway if we can continue to lift people up out of poverty and keep them out of poverty. Now, there remains skepticism, widespread skepticism, about the impact that stimulus has had on the economy. There's a common argument that stimulus spending doesn't go into the areas that have been hard hit, like manufacturing and food industry, but rather into essentials such as rent and utilities, which we talked about earlier with the studies that showed people who made less than $100,000 spent more of their money on the essentials. The same study showed that people who were wealthier also did not spend the stimulus money, but tended to save it. Now, indeed, in my view, this is just an argument that there needs to be even more stimulus support so that people have the means to spend on things beyond the essentials. Yes, if you give Americans $600, they're going to have to spend that money on their essentials, the things that will keep their families safe. But if they were to have more, they would have the means to go and buy takeout or buy a new washing machine and replace the one that they've been trying to get rid of, or buy a new television. If they're in a situation where they just need to take care of their immediate responsibilities, that's what they're going to do. So those who argue against stimulus make it abundantly clear why there's an urgent demand for support. We need to send out more stimulus checks. This is not an issue of only a baseline of dignity and honor for our peers and our neighbors, but it's also an essential policy to protect everyone in the economy, protect the financial interests of everybody from the top to the bottom. And until it's safe for people like my friend Drew to go back to work at his restaurant, we, the American people, including our government, need to continue to look out for each other.